the room in the basement. It was the beginning of the fall semester at Westbrook University, and while most of the students were still in the honeymoon phase of their college experience, Sarah felt like she was already getting caught up in the demands of school life. As a sophomore, she had already learned the hard way that balancing a social life with academics was a delicate art, especially when you had a part-time job in the library. But tonight, it wasn't a test or a paper that had her nervous. It was something far more unsettling. Sarah worked the late shift at the library on Thursday nights. It wasn't a terrible job. She mostly checked in and out books and helped students find research materials, but tonight was different. She had been assigned to the lower levels of the library, where the archives were kept. It was a part of the library that few students ventured into. The old, dusty hallways, stacked with boxes and shelves, had a haunting feel to them. The lights flickered on and off frequently, and there were strange sounds echoing from the depths, though no one ever really acknowledged them. She was told never to go too far into the archives, and for good reason. There were rooms that were kept locked, rooms that were so old even the library staff didn't have keys to them. It was rumored that those rooms were the remnants of the building's construction from decades ago, used for storage during World War II, and then sealed off and forgotten. Stay out of the old storage rooms, the head librarian, Ms. Harris, had warned her during her training. If you don't need to be down there, stay upstairs. It had seemed like a harmless enough directive, but tonight, Sarah couldn't help but feel drawn to them. There was something about the silence in the basement that made her feel uneasy and yet curious. It was nearing midnight when Sarah's shift was finally starting to wind down. The last student had checked out their book, and the library was almost completely empty. The fluorescent lights buzzed above her as she walked toward the back of the archives, footsteps muffled by the old carpet. She had to go to the staff closet to retrieve more paper for the printer, which was stored in one of the deeper rooms of the basement, casting long, eerie shadows. She had been down here many times before, but tonight, everything felt off. She kept glancing over her shoulder, feeling as though someone or something was watching her. When she reached the hallway that led to the staff closet, she noticed something strange. A door at the far end of the hall was slightly ajar. This door had always been locked. Sarah had passed it many times, but she'd never seen it open before. Curiosity tugged at her. She walked toward the door, her heart beginning to race. The air grew colder with each step, and the low hum of the lights seemed to grow louder, almost deafening. The door creaked as she pushed it open. Beyond it was a narrow staircase that led down into a dark, dimly lit room. Sarah couldn't remember ever seeing this part of the basement. She hesitated, but something inside her told her to go in. Taking a deep breath, Sarah descended the stairs. The room was cold, much colder than the rest of the basement. The air felt heavy, as though it hadn't been disturbed in decades. The walls were lined with old filing cabinets, the kind that looked like they had come from the early 20th century. Dust covered every surface, and the dim light from the bulb above did little to chase away the oppressive darkness. As she stepped further into the room, Sarah's foot kicked something. She bent down, brushing away the dust. It was a small, leather-bound book, its cover worn and faded. She opened it cautiously, finding handwritten pages filled with cryptic notes. The pages seemed to detail the history of the building, but the further she read, the stranger the entries became. It was as if someone had documented the bizarre happenings in the library. Strange noises, flickering lights, and accounts of things moving in the night. But what caught Sarah's eye was the last entry, scrawled hastily across the final page. "Do not open the door." The words seemed to jump out at her. She turned the page to find more writing, but there was nothing, just a blank page. Sarah shuddered. She couldn't help but wonder what door the writer was referring to. Was it the very one she had opened? The one that had led her into this room? She turned around, her heart hammering in her chest. The door at the top of the stairs was now shut. Her breath caught in her throat. There was no way it had closed on its own. She moved quickly toward the door, pulling it open with shaking hands. But the hallway beyond was not what she expected. It was different. The walls were darker, the light dimmer, the air heavier. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind her. She gasped, her eyes darting around the hallway. The oppressive silence was broken only by the sound of her own breathing, fast and panicked. She ran her fingers across the walls, trying to find something to hold on to, but everything felt wrong. The space seemed to stretch farther than it should have, and she realized she had no idea where she was anymore. The hallway seemed to go on forever. And then she heard it, a soft whisper, low and incomprehensible, coming from the end of the hall. "Help me." It was a voice, soft, pleading. But Sarah couldn't tell if it was real or if it was her imagination running wild. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling. The whispering grew louder, and the shadows in the hall seemed to move. She took a step forward and then another. The air felt thick with dread. She could barely see through the dim light, but her eyes locked onto something at the far end of the hall. A figure, a shape. It was moving toward her, but it wasn't walking. It was gliding. A cold sweat broke out on Sarah's forehead as she froze, paralyzed by fear. The figure, pale, skeletal, and dressed in ragged clothes, was floating toward her. Its eyes were wide and hollow, its mouth open in a soundless scream. The hallway began to twist and warp as Sarah stumbled backward, desperate to find an exit. But the figure kept coming, its eyes locked on hers, the whispering growing louder and more urgent. "Help me!" Sarah's heart pounded as she turned and ran, her footsteps echoing in the never-ending hallway. She reached the door again, but it wouldn't open. She tugged at the handle, her breath coming in ragged gasps, but the door remained shut. The figure was closer now, gliding toward her with unnatural speed. In a final act of desperation, Sarah shoved her shoulder against the door with all her strength. It flew open with a deafening crash. She stumbled out into the dark basement, gasping for air. The figure was gone. 6. Shaking, Sarah backed away and ran toward the staircase, not stopping until she reached the library's main floor. It was nearly 2 a.m. by the time she emerged from the basement, drenched in sweat and shaking. The library felt too quiet, too still. She glanced at the clock. The time didn't seem right. Had she been down there for hours? Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She never returned to the basement after that night. And though she told a few close friends about what had happened, no one ever believed her. But Sarah knew what she'd seen. The room in the basement, the figure, the whispers, they were real. And whatever was trapped in that place, whatever had been waiting for her, was still down there.